Welcome to the intro series for separate learning sessions that teach about the foundation of what is to become the caregiver's carabiner. And tonight, which is our first session, I'm so excited to have you here. Why a carabiner? I get it. It's a weird word. It's a weird word, but I'm going to tell you the story. So first, I'm going to share a little bit about me in case you don't know me yet. I'm going to tell you a little bit how I got started on this mission of mine. I'm going to share that story about the carabiner with you, my vision for what that membership looks like, and then we're just going to wrap it up with a brief overview of the 3 pillars because we're going to be going into a deeper dive into those in the upcoming weeks. So today, I was with my grandfather, and we were running some errands, and we were just sitting quietly in the car at a light. And now my grandpa is 97. Just put it in perspective a little bit. And he said, people say I don't talk a lot, but I don't have a lot to say. And I started laughing. And I said, well, Grandpa, it's not that you don't, I mean, yes, maybe you don't talk a lot, but you're very succinct. When something needs to be said, say it. And my grandpa, I will say, he is just one of those, I forget what the old commercial was, but when he speaks, people listen because they know if he's speaking, he has something to say. So I said to him, you just don't use a lot of extra words. That's all. You just don't use a lot of extra words. And we started laughing. But that's kind of the vibe I'm bringing to all of these sessions. I don't want to use too many extra words. I just want to be mindful of the time. And so I'm going to keep us to like 60 minutes or less because I know you have stuff to do, you have people to take care of. So let's do our thing. If you are here live with me and you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and I will pop in periodically and check on those. If you're catching me on the replay and questions come up to you, go ahead and send me an email. Send me an email with all your questions and I will connect with you as soon as I humanly can, and I'll get your questions answered. And you can either email me questions at lovingsupport@erincopeland.com. That's the email for that. So let's dig in. Okay, I'm Erin Copeland, and somehow it has become my mission to help soften the caregiving journey. And literally, there are some days I wake up and I'm going, how exactly did I end up here? How on earth did I decide to go down this path? Because when you're in like the 4th grade and teacher says, what do you want to be when you grow up? Caregiver? Not on the list. Like, okay, nursing, teacher, things like that. But since nobody talks about it, being a family caregiver is not really something that comes up on the list. So I have been the sole caregiver for my husband, Jerry, for well over a decade. I think we're going into like our 15th year now. And I wanted to provide you just with a snapshot of his journey because then you can get a better idea of what my journey has been like. So in 2009, Jerry was diagnosed with liver cancer. He had undiagnosed hepatitis C, which led to a cirrhotic liver, which led to liver cancer. And at the end of 2009, he had a major liver resection surgery to remove the lower right lobe of his liver. It was about 1/3 of his liver, and that removed the cancer, but it left him with a sick cirrhotic liver, what was left. But he was good. He was good for about 5 years. Like we kind of thought we were in the clear. But 5 years later, what was left of his liver started generating cancer, and a liver transplant was going to be his only remaining option for survival. And in the nearly 8 years that he was on the transplant list, he had countless procedures even after the resection. I mean, he had endoscopies to band varices so that his blood vessels wouldn't burst and he wouldn't bleed internally. He had ablations, embolizations, he had targeted chemo, he had surgeries, he had biopsies. If you name it, he likely had it. And I was his sole caregiver. In 2016, he had a seemingly successful liver transplant. But 17 days later, his liver, who we lovingly named Regina, Regina decided that she didn't want to play nice. And her DNA tried to take over Jerry's entire body. Also known as graft versus host disease, it's very, very rare in solid organ transplants. Less than 2% of solid organ transplant recipients get GVHD. And of that 2%, 80% of them die. And Jerry survived. Now, if you ever get to meet Jerry, if you ever get to know Jerry, probably even just a little bit, I think you will learn and quickly agree, because we joke about it, that Jerry's like the exception to every rule. In Jerry's world, rules are kind of just gentle suggestions. So I am happy to report, I like to insert here because sometimes I forget, my husband is doing fantastic. This year we celebrate his 8-year transplant anniversary. Regina behaves herself and he's doing really, really well. So just a little love for my husband. Because 2 years after his transplant, that cancer came back, which is also a highly rare occurrence. Like they watch people and they're like, for the first year, but after, after that, they're like, okay, he's golden. And then 2 years, cancer was back. So it turns out the original liver cancer had metastasized and it landed in his left adrenal gland. And so I was his caregiver through an adrenalectomy and radiation. 2 years later, cancer was back again, more radiation. And it turns out that Jerry's cancer just kind of lives in his body, just kind of lives in his blood like in a lazy river, and it just kind of floats around there. And if the conditions are right, it'll settle in and grow. But again, this summer, we are celebrating Jerry's transplant anniversary and he's in good shape. And so I like to share Jerry's journey because his journey is really unique, which made mine unique too. Because for every one of his tests, procedures, surgeries, and recoveries, I was there. I was waiting and not knowing, knowing and carrying that fear for both of us. I witnessed medical errors. I also met some of the most compassionate people I'd ever hoped to know. And because we moved a few times along the way, we moved from California to Texas and then Texas to Florida. I also have the very unique perspective of having worked with 4, actually now 5 medical teams in 3 different states. We went through the transplant intake process 4 times. That is a lot of doctors and nurses and specialists, medical professionals, just all the way around. And caregiving, it's just a very human experience. And it's condensed into these small, sharp pockets of time with little opportunity to process any single part of it in its entirety. So as caregivers, if we aren't mindful, we don't get to complete those cycles of fight, flight, or freeze, and that trauma begins to take residence in our bodies. Now, it was actually about 2 years after Jerry's transplant that I received the calling to write my book. I was never a writer. I didn't fantasize about being an author. Like it just was not in my wheelhouse. And it turns out, in hindsight, in my book, I have entire sections called In Hindsight. But in hindsight, it really was part of my healing process, because the calling, the desire I had to write the book was to let people know that they weren't alone. And that's the entire energy the book is grounded in. It is not, I'm sorry, ugh. It is a you are not alone book. It's not a how to book, it's not a guide. It is, I have been through this thing. You might be going through this thing. You might have already lived through this thing. And I get it. There's at least one other person on this whole earth that gets it. I had somebody read it recently, and they said, first they said, I had no idea that you had ever been through any of this. And second, they said it felt like I was holding your hand through the whole book. And I love that so much. Because everybody responds differently to caregiving. And no one, not even my therapists at the time, and especially none of the caregivers that I ever knew in my life, ever told me what it was like. They never talked about it. And specifically, nobody ever talked about the trauma. And so there I was sitting on Sunday mornings in my bathrobe on the couch, typing away on my laptop. And Jerry would say to me, "So, Aaron, what you doing over there?" And I go, "Oh, I'm writing my book." He go, "Oh, we're writing a book now." And I just go, "Yeah, I'm writing my book." And so finally, in March of 2022, I cannot believe it has been 2 years already. In March of 2022, Welcome to Caregiving, the things caregivers never talk about, debuted as an Amazon bestseller. Super proud of that. But it wasn't enough. I wanted there to be more. And I laughed because Jerry would say, I mean, are you making a pamphlet? The whole book, like with words, real book. But I wanted there to be more because caregiving is also an organizational nightmare. So when Jerry was in the hospital with the graft versus host disease, there was a parade of specialists that came through because they didn't immediately know what was wrong because it's such a rare occurrence. It was not the first thing that they checked for. And so he was in the hospital for, oh my goodness, it's total, I think, 3 weeks. And I believe the diagnosis portion of that was about a week and a half, and then treatments were after that. But I was trying to take notes, keep things organized. Who is here? What do you think? What do you say? They'd come in on rounds, just groups of doctors, and it was so overwhelming. And I went to like Staples or Office Depot or wherever looking for some kind of planner, calendar, something. And there wasn't anything, nothing. And so I decided to make something. And I created the patient handbook. So this is actually a binder system, and it's small so it can fit in your tote and it's easy to carry, but it's still a hard surface so you can write on things. This one, the one I actually pulled, it's the one I use. So let me find things that you don't. But I've got it's got different tabs. So it's got a place for contacts, calendar, a wellness section, and love notes. That's to write things down like where I parked my car because I would always lose the car because caregiving brain is real. We're going to talk about that in the Carabiner. But it has the appointments notes. Now, if you join, super tangent here, if you join as a founding member, you're going to get this. You're going to get this for free. But the appointment notes helps me organize before you go into the doctor. So this is where the communication between patient and caregiver happens. Before you go, so you can check in with the body. We've got the body scan checklist, so that you can round into what's happening in your body, figure out what's hurting, because the minute you step into the doctor's office, it's like going to the mechanic. The car never makes the noise when you show up in the mechanic. And you're sitting there in the doctor's office and you're like, I feel fine. and you don't feel fine. And so you get to ground into that space with the patient, with yourself. Like I said, I use this myself for all of my appointments, make all the notes, do all the things. It's been very handy for me. There is a full calendar in there as well. And even if I don't write all of my appointments in there, because yeah, I got a phone like everybody else. But it was very helpful for me to write like went into hospital and then like an arrow, like how long he was there, just to reference back to. It was just so helpful to me. And then fast forward through life to 2024. And my 94-year-old grandmother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And so, quite unexpectedly, I became a caregiver again because it's always unexpected. We never anticipate caregiving as much as we think we do. We know our parents are older than us. In my case, I knew my husband was older than me. Um, my grandparents, or I told you my grandpa's 97, my grandma is 94. So, but this time everything looked different. It wasn't the same. It wasn't just me and Jerry in this nice, neat little cocoon making our own little decisions. My grandparents were making the decisions for themselves. My grandfather was the intimate day-to-day caregiver for my grandmother. My dad was also a caregiver, and he specialized in like meals and transportation. And then my specialty, my role was like communication specialist. So I went with my grandparents to the doctor's appointments to take notes and ask questions, to follow up on medications. I would then translate information again to my grandparents in case there was something they didn't quite understand. I relayed the information to my dad and the rest of our family. And that is a very different caregiving experience from what I'd had before. And at times, it was really, really scary. At times, I felt really uncertain, just in, I guess, even trusting myself. Was I communicating everything properly, clearly? Was I communicating how my grandma was feeling to the doctor? Was I translating all the medical terms he used properly to my grandparents? And then was I communicating it all without too many words the rest of my family? Now, in this case, my grandmother passed away in March, which was nearly 2 months after her official diagnosis. And we aren't going to talk about grief tonight. I'm definitely moving through that, and it is definitely something that we will be talking about a little bit more in the feelings module in a couple weeks. And for sure, we're going to talk about grief much more extensively in the Caregiver's Carabiner, because there's a lot of facets to grief. There's actual mourning of a loss, but there is something called perceived grief, which I also experienced with Jerry. But we're going to dive more into that in the feelings module. And one of the lessons that I want to share with you tonight, because it's just been on my mind and I haven't had a chance to communicate it to my community, is that if you have a patient right now, if you are a patient, if you're a caregiver for a patient, and you use my chart. Now, if you don't know what my chart is, you may have something similar to this, but in Florida, it's basically the online portal that most of the major medical systems here use. And through it, you can access your medical records, your appointments, you can communicate with your doctor's office, test results pop up there first, like before the doctors even get a chance to review them. So it's super handy, super handy. And so a lot of people were like, Erin, I don't need the handbook because we got my chart. So after my grandmother passed away, my mind was just trying to make sense of things, trying to put things in order, replaying it through my mind. And I went to log into my chart, and it was she passed on a Friday, so this was like like Sunday morning, and her my chart was gone, gone, not accessible. And so I Googled it, like what happens to my chart when someone passes away, and it said access is shut down since the person is deceased. No one needs access to their medical information. And I was like, oh, I mean, okay, but so my public service announcement to you tonight is to please, please, please download your information. Download your information. Any important medical reports, any important communications, keep notes of your appointments. It's electronic, it's technology. Things can short out. And in the case of my grandmother, like I said, I was going through it just kind of a peace of mind thing. I was just trying to replay things and put things in order in my mind of what happened. And I wasn't able to completely do that. But if you're in a situation where maybe you're questioning the care a patient was receiving, that information is no longer going to be accessible to you. I am sure that you can go through the official medical records department, but I don't know what that process is. I don't know how long that would take. I don't know what all information you would receive. So keep track of your things. If you don't keep personal notes, that's fine, but download your stuff. I like writing hand notes because there's that brain hand connection. It sticks in my brain better. So when I'm meeting with somebody, I like to take hand notes. But anyway, I will get off my soapbox. That is my public service announcement. Okay. So here I am. I've written a book. I created the handbook. But there's more. Because then there was the whole support component that I felt like it was missing. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what I wanted to create. I knew I didn't want to create a traditional support group. And here is why. Traditional support groups didn't work for me and the type of caregiver I was. Now, last year I spoke at the Society of Transplant Social Workers National Convention. And in that talk, I talked about the different types of caregivers that I had identified. And I gave them little names. I've got the desert tortoise, I've got the barn owl, I've got the meerkats. And at the end of my presentation, some of the feedback that I received from them was, wow, no one has ever talked about there being different types of caregivers. Like they just treat them all the same. Like we treat them all the same. It's like a cookie cutter thing. And we're all different. And that's why traditional didn't work for me. So you have the desert tortoise, which is like me. I am a desert tortoise through and through. And through Jerry's transplant, like I wanted to do everything myself. I didn't ask for help. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know what to ask for. And I was fine. It's always fine. And just like a desert tortoise, if anybody approached me, I would hiss at them and snap at them, and I would withdraw into my nice little shell. I also identified the barn owls, which I felt like they were partners. They were a partnership. Somebody would be in the main role of caregiving, and then when they needed to tap out, when they needed a break, when they were overwhelmed, there was someone else there to take their space. And they really, really worked as a team. And I really feel like my little Florida family here took care of my grandma this way. My grandpa obviously was her backbone. He did everything day to day, minute to minute for her. And we tried to support him. Dad drove them to appointments, like when she needed tests and things like that done. He made sure they had food. I was the communication specialist, going to all the doctor's appointments and doing all of the translation. And during that time, I will say my PTSD did rear its ugly head. There were days where I started to have night terrors, which is a first in my life, and they are called that for a reason. And it was new for me. It was really scary. I do have a therapist, a talk therapist who I see, so I definitely went to see her. But I also went through the pillars that I'm teaching you guys about. And the combination of those really was able to pull that back so that the night terrors they stopped within a week. So it's not something that continued, but I was having the signs, I was having the symptoms, I was able to tap in, see, okay, where am I? What is happening? Find the awareness, find the feelings, and move through it and talk about it and reset it so that the night terror stopped. So there is, I have lived the evidence that it can work and it can work for me. And I feel like, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to get there. Barn owls. Let's go back. Meerkats. The meerkats are the gang. Actually, the collective noun for meerkats is a gang. It's a gang of meerkats. And they are your village. That's when just everybody shows up. You have brothers and sisters and aunties and uncles and cousins, and like everybody's there, which can be amazing. It can be such an amazing support system. And I have also heard from some caregivers that if they aren't skilled in creating boundaries, it can become very overwhelming for both caregivers and patients. So if you're in that kind of meerkat situation, that's just something to be aware of and something that we can move through using the pillars. And more recently, I've actually identified a fourth caregiver type. It's not in my book, it's brand new, and it is the ostrich. And the ostrich is just super big and lovable, and they really do want to help. Their heart wants to help, but they can't. Either their head is kind of literally in the sand, like an ostrich, and they cannot, they just can't deal. They want to, but they can't. Or there is distance, so much distance. Like my family's so spread out. We're all over the country. And through Jerry's journey, through my grandmother's journey, through all, that's the thing everybody said the most. They said, I wish I was closer. I wish I was there. I wish I could help more. And so there's this extended pool of caregivers who want to be involved, who want to help. We're still having all of these feelings, but they're not in the day to day. So the ostrich is really the folks that are just, they're not in the day to day, but their heart wants to be. And so those are the four kinds. And so going back to traditional support groups, with all of these different kinds of caregivers, how can one kind of support group, one cookie cutter kind of support group, serve all of these different kinds of personalities? It can't, because it's not science. It's a human experience. And for me, traditional support groups didn't really work because I couldn't find the place inside myself that would A, allow me to be vulnerable, and B, take care of everybody else in the room. Now, I understand that the latter was not my responsibility, but in my really heightened codependent state, I was incapable of creating a boundary that wouldn't allow myself to take care of everybody else in the room. I just couldn't do it. And so I couldn't allow myself to go to support groups. I couldn't make space for that. I didn't want to physically go somewhere because this is way before Zoom. Zoom was not a thing. I didn't want to physically go someplace. There was a part of me that was private. Maybe I didn't feel like talking about stuff, but how do you go sometimes and not other times? And so it just didn't feel right to me. And so this this is all what led me to create the Caregiver's Carabiner. So, are you ready? Are you ready to hear the story behind the name? Because I know it's crazy. I know it breaks like all of the marketing rules. Like everyone's, it's supposed to be easy to remember and make sense, and people know what it is and can spell it, and you don't have to explain it. And I broke all the rules. Here's the story. So I'm at brunch with my friend Jebby. Yes, there were mimosas. But they were not that influential. But stick with me or stick with me. So I'm trying to describe to her what I want to create, how I wanted it to be this place where caregivers could go, but virtually, because I don't want them to have to leave their people. And I wanted them to have a place that they could tap into in their pajamas in the middle of the night. I wanted them to have access to all of the resources that they needed. Now, I don't know about you, but when I am in the middle of my shit, I can't remember all my tools. I've read books, done trainings, done like been in therapy, all of the things, all the things. And then I can't remember when I'm in the middle of my anxiety. I can't remember what I'm supposed to do. And so I wanted a place where people could just log in. I didn't want you to have to troll the internet and find reputable sources for the things and figure it out. I wanted one place, a portal that you could go to and log in and see all the things. And then you get to pick the thing and try it. And if that thing doesn't work, because here's the thing. Let's say journaling worked for you forever. And then one day it doesn't. There's other tools, other resources, and I wanted you to have access to those. I wanted you to have access to things that are different to but enhance your talk therapy. Because I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a talk therapist, but I believe in it. I have one. I for years, I've always had a therapist. And so I wanted to introduce some different things like tapping, EFT, and I'm completing a course in running tapping so that I can teach you about that, how to do it. Maybe actually that's one of the upgrades to the founding members that I'm going to be adding is maybe some one-to-one tapping if you need it. It's open to you. But I'm telling Jebby, like I'm explaining all of these things with the mimosas and the brunch and the cinnamon rolls and all the things. And she's nodding and she's sipping and she's encouraging me. This sounds amazing. This sounds amazing. And I'm saying I want people to be able to move their bodies, like physically move their bodies, because when we can't finish those cycles of fight or flight, when we bottle it up and we move on to the next thing, it gets stuck. It gets stuck. It takes up residence in our bodies, and that's when we get sick. And so I had developed these pillars of tuning into awareness, feeling into the feelings, moving through it. And I wanted people to have fun. I wanted to introduce art things, journaling things, writing things. I didn't want to ignore the icky feelings. I'm like, no, we are not icky feelings. Like it's high vibe. And yes, a good, fun place to be, but we can't ignore the icky feelings. We have to feel them. And so I'm like, I'm going to have Stomp It Out Thursday. And there's going to be a special place in the portal that you can go and just type out, just dump your stuff if you want to. And so again, I'm talking. And she's nodding. And I said, but I don't want them to be tied to anything. I want them to be able to do them and flow. And then it's there when they need it. It's like I said, I thought I was kind of done with the caregiving thing. Husband's good, cruising along. And then my grandmother. And I was in this role again. I was like, oh, see, it's just not a one and done thing. And how do we teach the upcoming generations if we're not learning, if we're not talking about it? How do we do it? it needs to be there when they need it, to be there when they need it. And so now Jebby's starting to look at me like I'm a little bit crazy because I'm going, I want them to be free but connected. I said, like those clip things. He's like, the clip things. I'm like, yeah, those shiny D-ring things. People use them to carry stuff, and mountain climbers use them. Mountain climbers use them. And now she's like, oh, okay, Erin. So I said to our server, can you go ask Carol what this thing is called? And now the server's looking at me like I'm nuts because she also doesn't know. And Carol, who is the owner of the restaurant we were at, she yells over the bar. She goes, "Do you mean a carabiner?" Yes, yes, a caregiver. The caregiver's carabiner, a carabiner. And then you guys, I looked it up. I got home and I got on the computer and I'm like, what is the actual definition of a carabiner? I'm going to read it for you because it's exciting. Hold on. Let's see. A carabiner, a critical tool used to quickly connect components in safety critical systems. To connect components in safety critical systems. Because what is more safety critical than the doctor patient caregiver relationship? Because we're keeping people alive. That's what we're doing as caregivers. That's what we want to do. We want to keep our most favorite people alive and out of pain. That's what we're trying to do. And so then, of course, I got a visual. I get a visual of caregiver climbing the mountain, and they're jamming along, and they're just moving along fine. And then they just kind of lose their footing. Now, I'm not talking an avalanche, but they just kind of slipped a little bit, lost their footing, and they kind of fell back. The rope got them. Carabiner got them. It was there to support them, telling them what they had to do, how they had to be. I don't want to tell people what to do. Just trying to give you information and resources and love, because only you can do you. Only you can do you. Only you can heal you. Only you can do you. And so then I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't see anything besides a carabiner. So I had gone through different names, like the unsupport support groups. I'm like, not a support group. I went through a phase of the empowered caregiver, but I even talked to my therapist about that. And we were like, going from that place of just feeling tired and depleted where you like can't catch your breath, from that place to being empowered, like a lot of space, that feeling that you can get there and then that's doable. Like eventually you get there, but not from the space that I'm welcoming people. So that didn't feel right either. But the carabiner, so that is the story behind the caregiver's carabiner. And again, it is based on the 3 pillars, the things that I really wish I had knowledge of, and I didn't have it. And I really think that the awareness, the feelings, and the movement would have made such a difference, both in my journey while I was going on it and in my recovery. I've already given examples of how I've seen it make a difference in my recovery, but I just think they could have made such an impact earlier on. And there are things I use today. There are things I use when I'm triggered, and they just help bring me back. So just a quick overview before we wrap things up tonight. That first pillar is awareness, and part of that is maybe thinking outside of the box about what's happening to you, but it's all about considering where you are right now and what's happening with you right now. Because no one told me that caregiving was a traumatic event. Nobody. And nobody told me things like empathy can lead to codependency if you don't be mindful and stay aware of what's happening. And because I lacked that awareness, my recovery took so much longer, so much longer. I've, I'm still recovering. I'm still on that journey. And I think it could have been shortened significantly, just had I known, I've been able to acknowledge where I was with a little more honesty, a little more grace, because it can be just so, so challenging, but it can make such a difference. And so we're going to be diving deeper into awareness next week. And that's May 1st, same time, 7 o'clock. The second pillar is feelings. And this I think it's my favorite because I think it's where I've actually done the most growth. Because the first time someone said to me, you really need to feel your feelings, I thought they were crazy. I thought they were insane. And I said, I cannot. And we were talking about anger at the time. And I said, no, if I let that out, if I let myself feel that and I unlock that, it will consume me. It will control me. I honestly believed that I would feel nothing else for the rest of my life except just be an angry person if I let that out. And the person I was speaking to said, what if I told you it was already controlled? And that was when I first started working on feeling feelings. And it's, you know, we're not throwing you into this group going like, this is a baby step situation. It's having the awareness, thinking about it a little bit like, oh, am I feeling something about this? And like tempering it in, seeing what happens because you're already living your trauma. You don't need to do like some kind of massive self-healing developmental transformation. We're just trying to soften the journey. But we are going to be talking about those feelings of things like guilt, like resentment, even joy, because sometimes it can feel hard to feel joyful when the person you love is feeling pain. And it leaves us as caregivers just on this emotional roller coaster, which is exhausting physically and mentally. And while the carabiner is meant to be a supportive, like high vibe environment, we're like I mentioned before, we're not going to ignore those icky feelings. We're going to have a space to talk about them. We're going to have a space to move through them. Like I mentioned with those Stomp It Out Thursdays, like physically, like where is it? Where's the anger? Where's the resentment? And let's move through it. Let's move it. Then we're going to be diving deeper into feelings on Wednesday, May 8th, same time, 7 o'clock. Calendar. And the third pillar is movement. And movement, moving our bodies. But what I didn't realize was that connection between the trauma and the movement. And actually, I will, well, I know I'm going to put it in the carabiner, but there is a video out there. His first name has escaped me. Where is my book? It is Peter Levine, Healing Trauma. This is one of the recommended readings that will pop up on the reading list if you choose. And he shares a video. It is of a polar bear. And the polar bear, they tranquilize it to do something. I can't remember if it's I think they're just tagging the bear. But you watch, and if you watch any animals in the wild, when something happens to them and the fight or flight moment is over, they shiver down their whole bodies. There is a movement, a physical reaction, and then it's like it never happened. And you see this in this polar bear when it wakes up, its whole body does this ripple, this movement. You can see it in other nature videos. You know, a lion will be chasing a gazelle, the gazelle gets away and and then it goes back to eating grass. So it's not like always terrified. Oh, there might be a lion that way. And humans suppress this. So we don't let ourselves do the ugly cry. And that's just one example. On the flip side, sometimes we'll find that movement will release an emotion. Like you'll be in yoga and you'll be doing a good hip opener and you'll start to cry and you're like, come from? It's the stuff that we didn't get to move through that's hanging out in there, and it gets unlocked and it comes out. Um, and so we get to explore through movement where we're feeling things. When we get aware, when we find the feeling, we get to tap into where we're feeling it in our body, and we get to explore different movements to move through that. And that's the very basic foundation of the movement pillar. Um, I find it fascinating. I'm also a massage therapist. I've been a massage therapist for 12 years now. And so I'm just very intimately connected and aware and have knowledge of that mind body connection. And I've witnessed it on my table. I've witnessed physical releases. I've witnessed emotional releases with the physical. I, I've I've seen it. I've experienced it. And so it's just a lot of fun for me to bring all of these things together through the caregiving with my massage training and knowledge, all the little pieces I've learned, and put it in one space, and put it in this portal for you to be able to just access this knowledge to help you on your journey, help you on your journey. And so diving into the somatic movement is going to be on Wednesday, May 15th. And that's going to be our final meeting of the intro series before the grand opening to the Caregivers Carabiner, which will be on May 22nd. And I'm not going to go into a whole deep thing about that because we'll talk about that another day. There's links and sales pages and things out there. You can learn more information on my website at erincopeland.com. You can email me at lovingsupport@erincopeland.com, and happy to share any information with you if you want to know a little bit more about what that membership is going to look like. Because it is going to be an ongoing membership, because like I said, when you need it, you need it. And you don't always know when. Let's see. So I think that's all the things, you guys. You got a little bit about me and why I am doing this. You got the story of the carabiner, and you got a little bit of a preview about what we're going to be diving into over the next weeks. Now, remember, if you registered, you're going to get all of these on the replay. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week. Now, before we sign off, let's everybody, if you can, ground your feet a little bit, put your feet on the floor, shake our hands. Let's get a little movement going. Shake your head a little bit. Maybe move your eyes in a circle, do them the other way. Look down to your right, down to your left. Deep breath. Hold it. Big exhale. And just remember, it's all about love. You guys have a fantastic evening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.